Welcome to the Mirror Talks podcast, where we deconstruct some of humanity's most disconnecting and limiting assumptions and offer an alternative, a free state of consciousness, unbiased, naturally wise, and genuinely loving. We will shed a more enlightened perspective on everyday experiences to help anyone willing realize their true potential and inspire a contemporary spiritual life lived in service to all. Say goodbye to the man-made paradigms of distorted ideas. Let's become pure, free, and actually intelligent once again.
We just finished recording an episode on healing, and I actually came to this episode with a few questions, specific questions about the nuances of healing and what it is and how to heal others and how to heal yourself. But what was so interesting was as we got into it, and as Bentinho started explaining, really that all healing is self-healing. And there's one essential way that healing works. I saw how simple it was. So a handful of my questions just kind of evaporated into thin air. And the conversation just took a turn for the obvious, which tends to happen in a lot of these podcasts. As we deconstruct something that seems complex, there's actually such a simplicity to it, such a universality to it. So that's what I loved most about this episode on healing. That said, some of the stuff we got into this episode was how to become a more precise healer of others, how to become a more crystalline healer. We also got into some of the pitfalls, the potential pitfalls of communities that overly emphasize the need for shadow work or healing sort of as a whole modality. It's a comprehensive episode. We really cover from A to Z around healing, and can't wait for you guys to enjoy it like I did.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of Mirror Talks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today we wish to talk about the topic of healing. But first off, we have another host here with us, Jamie. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you.
Jamie is from Canada, and he just recently came to visit us here for a bit. And he's also working with our team since a few months now. And Kelly was in a deep sleep. Alarm didn't wake her up, but she's joining us from the guest couch over here. So you might hear her insert a few questions as well. And we have another guest. It is a dung fly, as they call them in India, I believe. So if you see us grabbing things in midair, or we're attempting to safely release the fly so that no animals are harmed in the production of this podcast.
Ooh, it's right by you.
So when I asked on Facebook and Instagram, when I announced that we're going to do a podcast, and I asked people for themes and topics and questions, the topic of healing came up a whole bunch. Both from the angle of how to deal with like chronic kind of ailments and physical pain, but even more broadly, just about the topic of healing. What is healing? How to heal, and so forth. So it's been on our list for a while to shoot a episode on that topic. And I'll start off giving my definition of healing, and then feel free to chip in if you have any questions on behalf of the audience or yourself, or any comments.
Perfect.
So healing, my view of healing, it has transformed over the years. When I was a teenager, I was introduced to Reiki and some other forms of healing, but I was initiated into Reiki. And the point of view that most people have of healing, the understanding that most people have of healing is, first of all, they picture some kind of a ceremony with like either hands-on or healing over distance or visualization. And those are all potential tools that we can use in the act of healing. The act of healing between one person and another, seemingly, which is not really what's happening, but I'll get into that in a bit. So there's so many healing modalities out there, and most of them involve visualization, intention, some form of ceremony, invocation, calling for other beings, deities, angels, what have you, using substances, sage and what have you, crystals. So there's many, many forms, there's many expressions of the concept of healing. But what's healing at the core? And I think my view differs a little bit from what's out there for the most part. So I'll start with explaining that. And I'll use a little bit my own progression with the topic of healing and working with people, because I have done those more typical conventional healings in the past. And every once in a while that still organically happens, but it's rare. I typically don't engage in healing practices like Reiki or visualization. Actually, the most would be visualization, but it happens very organically. But I'm not putting myself in a position where I'm the healer of somebody else for several reasons. And when I do, it's a more complex game that's more like almost like a show or ceremony that's created for the person to kind of open up to the belief that they're healed and accept that healing within themselves. It's not really because I need those ceremonies or intermediary means.
Like a permission slip for them.
Exactly. It sets the stage and, puts the mind in a state of like being receptive to the healing and so forth. But at the heart, healing is nothing more but the realignment of the mind, body, spirit to the one infinite creator. There's many ways I could say this, so I'll say it in a few more ways. It's the realignment of the personality, the personal mind, to God. It's the realignment of the mental and emotional body to that deeper spirit body, which is naturally less distorted and more in harmony with the creator, with the essential field that we've been talking about, unity, consciousness, the oneness, the substratum of all things, that great I am that pervades every experience and so forth. So that's really all that healing is. Like anytime healing happens, it's some version of replacing a certain configuration, an energetic configuration, mental configuration, emotional configuration, or physical configuration in terms of typical Western healing, like when you go to hospital and you get surgery. It's all a variation, it's all a distorted variation of the individual realigning its mind, body, and spirit to that intrinsic perfection of the one infinite beingness, creator. There are several ways to do that. Some are more indirect, but can sometimes be more effective. And some are more direct and can sometimes be less effective. Some are more direct and can sometimes be more effective. And sometimes the less direct can be less effective. So it really depends on who the entity is that's being healed. So it requires, for the most part, it requires someone who is sensitive, who is to a great degree awake and aligned within their own alignment. People that are not fully aligned with themselves can perform the function of healing, but it's just not as recommended. They can sort of put their own bubble aside and step into the vibrational state of the healer, which then offers that vibration to the person to be healed, which then has the choice to accept that frequency or that new configuration. But for the most part, it's really helpful if the healer themselves are to a great degree healed of the distortions in the mind, the body, and the spirit. There is in the substratum of the great I am, of God, of source energy, of intelligent energy, of intelligent infinity, of this pure awareness, this perfected, undifferentiated oneness, whatever name you want to give it, the creator. Intrinsic in it, there is an intelligence that cannot be fathomed by the intellect. We cannot reduce it in our terms, in our language, in our imagery, into our means. It cannot be reduced to that which we use on a day-to-day basis. The means that we have with the intellect and the body, we cannot reduce that intelligence. We cannot fully understand it with our means, basically. However, it can be directly contacted, and this is where the magic of healing comes in. When an entity is able to contact this intelligent energy, if you will, the substratum intelligence that resides in the very core of every atom, everywhere, all the time, then through that contact, if you will, a vibrational field, an example, a catalysis may be provided to the one that's seeking to be healed. Let's say the one that's seeking to be healed, which is a prerequisite for the most part, is that someone wants to be healed and that someone is seeking out that healing. Otherwise, it's an infringement upon that entity's free will and their journey and their path, which we'll get into in a little bit as well, because there's great nuances to understand there. Because healing really is, it's a full picture that needs to be understood properly. And when it is, it becomes a tool that's naturally available to us in a balanced way. So this innate intelligence that is present in all things gets distorted by our personalized frequencies, the vibrations of our mind-body-spirit complex. The spirit being always in the least distorted configuration, virtually always, and the mind and body being in a more distorted situation. The body being a reflection of the mind. So basically, also healing has many aspects or levels to it, things that can be healed. It can be of a physical nature. We're talking about a physical ailment that can be healed, both through Western science or medicine, as well as through alternative ways, as well as through direct healing by a profound perception change or vibratory change in the entity who is seeking healing. Ultimately, all healing is self-healing. Interacting with healers of different kinds is just a permission slip. And by engaging in that permission slip, even something as dense and physical as surgery, where something is removed, that is still the healer, the physical healer, giving you a permission slip to accept that new configuration. But really, it's a permission slip for loving yourself more, for feeling more worthy, for feeling more connected to the one infinite creator, for feeling realigned and redirected on your path, and so on and so forth. So that's why a lot of the times when, let's say, a tumor is removed successfully with no trace left, why in some people does it stay that way, and why in others does the seemingly same tumor resurface? And it's because the free will, the overall intelligence of that mind-body-spirit complex has not accepted the new configuration, or at least not permanently, which can have different causes. For the most part, it has two causes. When healing is not accepted, or it's not maintained, or it's not a permanent healing, whether it's of a physical or mental, emotional nature. But let's use the physical example. And again, just take this all as my philosophy, take it or leave it. Let's say a tumor is removed, and in person A, the tumor never grows back, and they're healed of cancer for the rest of their life. And in person B, after 6 months, it resurfaces. For the most part, there's two main categories of reasons why this tumor would resurface. One is it serves a purpose that we, with our mental intellect, our physically oriented linear mind, our incarnational intellect cannot understand. But the larger intelligence of our beingness actually desires the condition, the impairment, the distortion, because somehow it serves a purpose for the lesson that wants to be learned in this incarnation. That's one main category, where the overall beingness, beyond just the conscious mind of the individual, so they can shout and scream and prefer or not prefer all they like. But if the core of who they are actually sees that the distortion has a proper place in their life, a proper function, then the distortion, although it is a distortion, although it is an illness, the illness is actually in alignment with the path and the purpose of this incarnation. So it's actually not a distortion. Removing the distortion is more of a distortion than the distortion, because you're removing the functionality of the tumor in this case, or whatever the disease is.
Yeah, that's cool.
Does that make sense? So that's the first category, which kind of goes over people's heads and requires a sort of a holistic understanding of ourselves as a mind-body-spirit complex with different levels of intelligence or consciousness, and therefore also different levels of free will that can sometimes contradict itself. I can consciously, with all I know, think this is best for me. But if a higher portion of me has chosen with a rather great firmness or deliberateness to explore a certain journey, to explore a certain path, then I may think and be convinced with my conscious limited thinking mind that what's best for me is path A. But the larger part of my free will is actually continuing to choose path B. So I can fight that. That's why resistance typically doesn't help to heal illness. Anti-cancer doesn't typically help. Anti-illness doesn't typically help. Can occasionally, but for the most part, it doesn't really help long term because it lacks understanding and acceptance of the fullness of oneself. So true healing, becoming a true self-healer, really requires us to understand ourselves more fully, to accept ourselves more fully, and therefore to become a more unified, integrated being. So if we develop a truly integrated, conscious, holistic understanding of these sort of different levels of ourselves, we can become very effective self-healers, both mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically even. So to go back to my former point, there's two main categories why the tumor would resurface. One, I have just explained, is at a different level of our very own free will is actually choosing, out of a benign reason, out of a positive, holistic reason, to have the condition. The second main category would be simply that the individual on a conscious or subconscious level does not accept the new configuration because whatever caused the misalignment that then became physically manifest is still present. And typically it's something along the lines, there's all kinds of sort of intricate sub reasons or sub causes, but for the most part, it's some kind of a basic distortion of one's sense of worthiness, one's sense of alignment with the Creator, hence the term worthiness, because if I see that I am actually desired here, that I'm created out of this perfection, then naturally I believe and I feel and I know that I'm worthy. And that actually opens up a lot of the energy centers and opens up a lot of sort of the natural healthy configuration of mind, body, and spirit to be sustained. But if I have an intense belief in my unworthiness, and I go, and over time that expresses itself perhaps as a tumor, and I go get the tumor removed, that's a temporary permission slip for me to believe I have healed, but the cause has not been fully addressed. And I still believe I'm unworthy. Maybe for a moment I had a glimpse of what it felt like to be more worthy because now I was cancer-free, right? And so therefore, there was a little bit of that glimmer of hope, but it didn't last so long. And my belief system kicked back into full gear. And I basically haven't fully addressed my sense of unworthiness or imperfection or not being good enough. I'm just using one example. There's many different layers, anger, frustration, all kinds of beliefs that we can have that are not consonant, that are not vibrationally aligned with the truth of our perfection. So then it resurfaces because we quite literally recreate the condition. We remanifest the condition because we haven't solved the cause on a mental level or on a mental emotional belief system level. And this is where the overview that we did in the other podcast episode, where I kind of mapped out the mind or the psychology with the level of consciousness, points of view, paradigm or belief system, and then it's actually their thoughts and emotions and so forth, the personality. Because if we can retrace it, where this distortion originated from, if we can find our belief, our paradigm that suggests we are not healthy, or that suggests that we are not perfect, or that suggests that we are not worthy, or that we're not worthy in the eyes of the Creator. When that gets healed, when that gets realigned, there is, in most cases, no longer a purpose for the tumor. Therefore, the tumor would either self-heal or it would be removed physically, because that's the permission slip someone needs who doesn't believe in alternative ways. Therefore, they'll seek that out. Otherwise, they won't believe they can be healed. Therefore, they won't be healed because they'll continue to perpetuate the condition with their belief system. So they get it removed in a way they believe it can actually be healed, which is then traditional medicine, or not traditional, conventional Western medicine, like surgery. And then, as a result, if that is combined with the inner healing, then it simply doesn't resurface. So does that make sense? The two categories?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Either another level of our own free will, our own beingness, sees a purpose for the illness. And one might ask, what would such a purpose be? Why would my higher self, if we want to call it that, why would it want me to have cancer? Right? Does it not love me? And it can even reinforce the sense of unworthiness, like not being loved, being abandoned, and like being hated at a core deep level. It's a horrible belief to believe your higher self hates you or it wants to hurt you or why me, why this? And a lot of people have that victim sense, and I've had it in my life. So I know the terrible contrast that generates in the emotional guidance system. Just feels awful to believe that life is against you in some way, or that your higher self even is against you. So be mindful of those sort of traps and like really have faith that there is somehow a purpose behind our conditions, especially if they maintain themselves when we do the inner work. Then there is something about that aids us in redirecting our focus or keeping our focus down a certain narrow pathway that ensures a greater or gives a greater probability that will fulfill the main intention that we have for this life, that will follow along the lines of the vibratory pathway, if you will, that is filled with us learning the lessons and extracting the benefit and being of service in the way that we, in a sense, have set ourselves up to do and be. Whereas if that misalignment would not be there, or the physical inability wouldn't be there, then our sort of vain egoic tendencies would be much more inclined to do other things or be focused on other things or feel perhaps cocky or super arrogant because of this skill or that skill. Therefore, sometimes the higher self limits what we physically can do to teach us either humility or openness towards a different path. And it encourages often to ask the really deep questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What are my priorities? How have I been focusing in ways that are trivial and not true to my soul? And so on and so forth. And those are the main reasons why we would have a condition that goes against our sort of personal preference, but it seems to be there for a long period of time. Kelly, did you have a question?
And not really a question, just a comment. Yeah, I agree with what you say about when we realize that there is a purpose for everything that happens. And it can be a bit disturbing to realize that on some level we asked for this ailment, whether it's physical or emotional. So it's helpful to recognize that everything is just for learning. Like the reason we're here as souls is to learn, and healing really is just another form of learning. But what I've seen is that it does have a higher purpose, and it seems to be really well set up in the sense that one being might experience something that they need to heal from, and their process of healing, when they complete that journey, it feels like the completion of the learning. But then they are able to go on and usually attract into their experience other people or other beings who then need to learn that from them. So they learn from their experience, and then they end up teaching other people from the experience as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, I see that as a very common reason as well for limitations in life or certain experiences like, I don't know, being kidnapped or being raped, or, you know, when people have sort of these horrific experiences or traumatic experiences, it very often leads into a life that is inspired towards service to others, which is what the soul typically wants from a lot of its incarnations, is to practice to be of service to others, because along the path of service to others, you're going to meet all your own shadows, insecurities, lack beliefs, and you're going to crystallize yourself further and further. You're going to expand and refine your consciousness further and further in alignment with your soul and with the sort of primordial qualities that are inherent, intrinsic in this infinite intelligence. So you become more and more aligned as a soul and as an incarnational being to that substratum intelligence, that motherboard source energy, through certain limitations that guide you along a certain path to make certain choices. Nice.
Yeah, one thing I want to just get clear on is the mechanics of healing, like whether it's child abuse or a stroke or a broken leg or like straight up insecurity or like fear of public speaking, is all that the same healing? Like healing all of that is the same mechanism?
In essence, yes. It's just the expression that's different. It's just the tone or the shape that's different. The permission slip that's different. But in essence, all healing is a realignment of a distortion, a distorted belief, a distorted thought, which can then over time manifest itself as a distorted physical body. But at the core, it's all about readjusting, realigning that distortion to a lesser distorted state. A state of thinking, a state of being, a state of having a belief system that is less out of alignment, that's more transparent to the underlying principles of universal love, abundance, freedom, compassion, perfection, unity, and so on. So one of my favorite books is the Tao Te Ching. And there's this one sentence, for example, that says, "Hold fast to the power of the One. It will heal the body and merge it with the spirit." And then there's a Law of One quote, which is one of my other favorite books, that says something very similar. One of the primal distortions of the Law of One is that of healing. Healing occurs when a mind-body-spirit complex realizes deep within itself the law of one. That is, that there is no disharmony, no imperfection, that all is complete and whole and perfect. Thus, or as a consequence of that, the intelligent infinity within this mind-body-spirit complex reforms the illusion of body, mind, or spirit to a form congruent or aligned with the law of one. The healer acts as energizer or catalyst for this completely individual process. So, Tao Te Ching says, hold fast to the power of the One. It will heal the body and merge it with the spirit. Law of One says that healing occurs when a mind-body-spirit complex realizes deep within itself the law of one, that is, that there is no disharmony, no imperfection, that all is complete, whole, and perfect. And then as a result, and this is what I was talking about, that the intelligent energy intrinsic, innate to all forms, to all atoms, if you will, visualize in that way, it is an intelligent infinity with an intelligent energy. And that component, that intelligence within us, responds to our realization of that unity by reforming the illusion of body, mind, or spirit to a form that's more congruent with the law of one. In other words, healing. And then they add, the healer acts as energizer or catalyst for this completely individual process, meaning that the healer is not responsible for the healing. They're only energizing or exemplifying and therefore offering an opportunity in their frequency, in their vibration, in their understanding, in their performance or whatever the art or act of healing is that they express through. Sometimes it's just a vibration. It's just a state of consciousness of an entity that is providing the one that seeks to be healed with a vibratory example of a state of energy, a state of alignment that is higher, that is more aligned. And then the one to be healed, the one that seeks to be healed, if they want to, if they so choose, with all of their being, to accept that alignment and to accept that indivisible unity that's at the core of their beingness, then naturally the healing occurs as a product of this intelligent infinity. It's not because of anyone doing any mental tricks or visualizing, not really. That's why that's a less direct path. Cool. The whole like overly symbolized ways are just permission slips for people to step into that new configuration, that new belief system, that new understanding, that new state of consciousness, and to embrace it, to get to know it, to feel what it feels like. And then it has the ability to accept it or reject it based on how worthy it believes it is. For example, right? That's how that belief system could block that opportunity or that offer. And then it's really the law of one. It's God, if you will, source energy, that naturally then readjusts the mind-body-spirit complex to the new belief system or configuration of energy. As a result, then that manifests itself, or that appears as what we would call as healing.
Nice. Because from the perspective of the person being healed, in truth, there is no healer. Like, it's an illusion.
Right. Yeah. A completely individual process. All healing is self-healing. The healer just offers an opportunity, just an example.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, for people who don't know, when Bentinho says mind-body-spirit complex in the context of the law of one, that refers to like an entity or an individual. Or is that what you would say?
Yeah, you could say it that way, yeah. The sort of the main components, the main vehicles of our existence as an individual entity, you would call it the mind-body-spirit complex. And so that's our vehicle. That's through which we experience. And the physical body is really the expression of the mind. It's really the creature, the creation of the mind. So if the mind has some strong distortions or lack beliefs or points of view that it harbors that goes against the natural way that God sees life, the natural way that is actually the truth of existence, it will manifest itself as some kind of a distortion or ailment, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually.
So I'm curious. I've been curious about this for a while with you. Although hearing you talk about this now, it seems quite a bit simpler. It's like just realize the oneness, just like go back to the God state, essentially. But still, I'm curious how...
That's the most direct healing, yeah.
Yeah.
If someone can realize deep within themselves the law of one.
Yeah.
The deeper one realizes the law of one, the quicker, easier, more automatic the healing is on an ongoing basis, because we're healing all the time. We're distorting all the time and we're healing all the time, you could say. And if we don't, as long as we don't obstruct this natural reforming ability that our mind-body-spirit complex has, by just staying in alignment and realizing deep within ourselves our innate worthiness as co-creators and as ultimately being one with the law of one, and the law of one being all that there is, then naturally there is a free flow in energy. Doesn't mean that someone like that could not develop an illness, but that would typically be for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead.
No, yeah, it's funny how simple that makes it. It's just like a sweeping answer to all the complexity that goes on in the healing world.
Right.
But still, just having known you for a while, I've seen how quickly you heal. So stuff that if I've literally watched you and been like, if I was in that situation, I would still be traumatized, or I would have handled it horribly compared to how you did. So I've seen you heal quickly, more quickly than I could, or I've seen anyone else heal. So yeah, I'm curious in a way what your process is when something tough happens, or when there's something that you actually do need to heal from.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do?
So the reason that the healing for me happens faster than it does for many is exactly because of what I just shared. Because my conviction is already very deeply rooted in the law of one, right? So since that conviction is there, there's nothing really that can shake that conviction. There might be different aspects of me, remnant aspects like mental, emotional, bodily aspects that can be shaken for a while, or that can be distorted or tweaked. But since the core conviction at a very deep spirit level is very closely connected and transparent to the law of one, it's like this, you can kind of imagine it like this background space filled with infinite energy and infinite intelligence that just naturally, continuously realigns and rebalances while you proceed. That's why, that's why certain people that have that alignment to that degree, they can, in a sense, endure more catalysts if needed. They also attract less catalysts typically to themselves, that is of a personal nature, but they can still attract a whole lot of challenge and puzzling complexities in their desire or alignment to, say, be of service to others. So the reason they can continue to sort of what would typically to a more a person that doesn't understand this as much appear to be like a pushing through, perhaps, or like a carrying a big load. It's not that the load is not an experience per se, but because this background is so much vaster, because the intelligence is so obvious and so clear, there's a constant reinforming of the mind-body-spirit complex, also in relationship to its creations and its situations and its relationships. So there's a very fast ability to replenish one's energy. So it's not that I never get drained if I'm in like some kind of a dynamic that's out of alignment and somehow I've been letting that fester for a while, which doesn't really happen anymore, but it happened for quite some time, out of an imbalance towards love and care, backed up then with this, oh, I can handle it anyway because I'm infinite oneness. And then there's sort of still a subtle neglect, or still a subtle sort of weird, twisted idea of unworthiness, which can lead into what we could say is the bias towards love without wisdom, like overly compassionate without regard to one's sort of natural reservoirs of energy that are naturally available per sort of second of existing, if you will. It's like a battery, it's like a iPhone battery trying to power a Tesla car. But the battery, if it doesn't have any wisdom, if it doesn't have any regard for self, or if it has some kind of a belief of unworthiness, it will be inclined towards martyrdom, towards service to others to the point of martyrdom and self-depletion and so forth. And I've had to deal with that quite a bit in my life. So I'm very grateful to say now that that's no longer so much the case. I mean, in fact, hardly at all. So I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, the reason why I could just continue to push through and be of service, albeit with a slight distortion towards the bias of love, with less wisdom or perhaps less wholeness or less appreciation of myself as equal to every other self, which is still distortion. You know, we glorify it like loving others more than yourself, but it is a distortion, and it is a big middle finger to the creator, because you too are the creator.
Nice.
So in a balanced state, you value and love ultimately yourself impersonally. At first, personally, you need to learn to love yourself, but then impersonally, you learn to love yourself equally and evenly to anyone else and respect your own rights and boundaries as much as anyone else. Are you able to push through that if it serves a bigger purpose? Absolutely. Are you able to let somebody use you as a doormat if you see from wisdom that it serves a purpose to a large crowd of people for whatever reason, or it serves a benefit just for this one individual, and you know you're so connected to this reservoir that you know you're invincible anyway, ultimately, and it doesn't matter how you get temporarily distorted in mind, body, or even spirit to a degree, because you're holding it in an even bigger space than the mind, body, spirit. So the confidence, the conviction in that alignment to the law of one, and the consistent practice of recognizing the law of one allows, like I said in a different podcast episode, the refresh rate of one's energy and one's experience is so much higher. So you're not holding a grudge. So you're not, or if you do, it's temporary, and you see it so quickly and you understand it and you integrate it, and boom, it's gone like it never happened, and you're wide open and available again. At which point, if you're at that level, then the next more subtle thing to watch for is the bias towards love without wisdom, which can lead to self-martyrdom if there's any remnant of unworthiness or perfectionism in terms of like needing to be better for other people or needing to help them and heal them, and not honor yourself just as much as you would honor another, which is a somewhat rare problem. It's not a big problem in our world, right? We could need a little bit more of that distortion. It would be a step up from our selfish distortion. But for the spiritually inclined adept that really wants to take its balance all the way, it is important at some point to watch. Once we've stepped out of our personal consciousness and we've become, which I call shepherding consciousness, which is the state in between person consciousness and mirror consciousness, is where we have popped our personal bubble. We know we're more than just a personality. We've started to integrate our lack beliefs and so forth, and we've started to transmute ourselves, and our intention now is to be of service to others as a means also to learn ourselves more rapidly and to spread the love and the light of the one infinite creator. At that point, it becomes relevant to look at the subtler imbalances that may still have ties to remnants of lack beliefs that are part of the conditioning of the childhood and so forth.
So do you do that kind of healing where you like go back and look at remnants of stuff in the childhood, or
Yeah, if it comes up,
okay.
if it arises. If I notice that there is any kind of pattern or manifestation that indicates that there is such a thing, but it's not obvious, then I will inquire. I might ask that question, even though I don't really need it from the state of consciousness. But if it's a pattern that continues to kind of create a subtle wobble in my mind, body, spirit, complex experience or relationships, then I'll look at it just to clear out my closet, so to speak. I've definitely done a lot of that over the course of my life. And now I just do it when it shows up as something that needs attention, which just is less and less over time, naturally, because of the work that we do, right?
I was just thinking that when you're faced with a challenge, particularly one like healing, where you may experience a lot of pain, there's such a fine line between self-pity and self-compassion. And it depends which side of the line you're on as to whether you're going to kind of wallow in your lesson or you're going to have compassion and help yourself move forward. And I think the same would apply for the person who acts as a healer. If they have some form of pity for another person and they are healing out of that, it's going to really maybe keep the person stuck in subtle ways versus having compassion for them.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, having a state of consciousness of pity already declassifies you as disqualifies you, invalidates you as a healer. Because the whole thing about healing, really, if it's a conscious healing, there's lots of random healing that's happening just by being with people and like consoling people and having friends and stuff. But we're talking about sort of a step up from that deliberate healing, where there is the apparent appearance of a healer and the apparent appearance of someone to be healed, that wants to be healed. Then the healer in this scenario, the only way they can heal is if they see that person as more perfect than they see themselves. If they see that person to be healed or the entity to be healed in its completeness, in its wholeness, in its perfection. Otherwise, that their vibration as a healer is not aligned to their alignment, to their healed self. And then they cannot give off that opportunity. They cannot provide that catalyst for self-healing. They cannot offer the vibration for the other person to accept that configuration. Doesn't mean we should never call people out on their stuff. Oh, because it would reinforce their lack beliefs. Yeah, sometimes maybe, but there is also an art to calling people out on their stuff when that's needed. But at the same time, especially if we're in a position of healer, we need to make sure that we see them as perfect. We can call things out. We can reflect things to people. And they can take that in insecure ways sometimes and miss the fact that the healer, the balanced healer, the crystallized healer, the advanced healer, just because they're reflecting a distortion doesn't mean that they lack the vision of your perfection or of your completion, which has been part of my challenges with certain dynamics or relationships or even like crowds of people or how it's interpreted by the media and so on, is because, but especially in say like more personal relationships or not even personal relationships, but if someone that perhaps comes to a retreat and has like a short interaction with me, or they have a Q&A with me on stage, or every once in a while, they'll feel perhaps offended by reflection, right? And definitely in mainstream, when people see a scenario like that, they'll like, oh, it's such a big deal that you dare say what's wrong with a person. But what's not understood is that actually, because you see that entity in their wholeness and their completion, you see also their distortion or misalignment towards that completion. Right. So to point that out to them is for the most part, a very compassionate act that can lead to healing if they accept that offering. But if the ego defends it and like tries to justify it or tries to call it like asshole behavior on behalf of the healer or teacher, then, it's a closed door. The higher self might still accept that new configuration on behalf of the entity, but it is rare because if they're stubborn and insistent, then they'll continue to create the reality they have, including the state of their body, mind, and spirit. So pity would be an example of me as a healer not seeing the wholeness and perfection of the entity that comes to be healed. So then I can't really offer anything. But we do project a lot of our pity And we have such a soft spot for the pity. And we feel so afraid of our loneliness, of not being good enough, not blending in with society, being an outcast, that we just try to sort of keep everybody from feeling those emotions. And we try to prevent ourselves from seeing those distortions because it's better to be ignorant of it and just like be nice to each other. But it's actually very destructive. Niceness can be very unhealing, can be very unloving. Whereas clear, firm reflection can be very loving, even if the ego doesn't like it. They have the choice to accept the configuration, at least. Before that, they didn't. If I just play into your self-wallowing self-pity and victimization and your belief in why me, it's like, oh yeah, why you, this really sucks for you. Occasionally that can help to ease things. So they can like, okay, now I'm heard, someone recognizes my situation. That can be healing sometimes. But also a lot of the times it's not. It's a case-by-case basis, and it requires the sensitivity of the healer to be on par with the level of healing that's sought by that entity. And of course, it also depends on if that entity actually comes to you to be healed, if they're asking for that. If not, then I'm not reflecting people left and right. Actually, not at all. I'll avoid giving any kind of reflection, at least in conscious ways to them, or in ways that they are conscious of, because they're not asking for it consciously. So to their conscious mind, I will not be offering any kind of reflection. And I might be playing into their story to a large degree. Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, that sucks. But that's because they're not asking. But if someone comes to a retreat or someone asks for healing or reflection, then the truth can be offered, right?
What if somebody doesn't ask you verbally, but you feel called anyway, or you feel some sort of, I mean, is it possible to get the healing reflection from you without verbally asking you for it?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. And this happens all the time. So this really approaches more the mirror state of consciousness, where it requires someone to be so aware of the perfection of all that is, that they're able to channel that intelligence in all these kinds of ways and recognize the different levels of an entity as they're requesting for healing. So this is really kind of above most people's heads at this stage. I can comment on it a little bit, try to simplify it. Yes, a lot of the times I'll just sort of collectively call it the higher self, but there's different sort of levels and configurations to an entity's levels of consciousness. But let's just sort of collectively say the higher self in this case is every level of consciousness except their personal conscious mind that they're conscious of. So any level that they're not conscious of, but that is still part of that entity's free will. The more sensitive one becomes, the more transparent to the love one becomes, the more self-knowledge one gains and self-mastery, the more one can recognize those sort of requests or levels that are not verbal, that are not conscious to the entity. So oftentimes I have sort of, for lack of a better word, an exchange or dialogue with someone's higher self that's completely different from the exchange or the dialogue that I'm having with them in a way that they can consciously understand. And oftentimes it happens at the same time too. It's like chess being played at different levels, so to speak. Because sometimes the request is there in the overall beingness, or let's just say higher self, which is not entirely accurate, but you get it. The higher self of that entity is asking for a new configuration to be offered to the entity. But the conscious mind of that entity is not ready for that, or doesn't have the symbols or the context or the understanding required to ask for it in a conscious way. But overall, they do desire that some form of healing. So then it's such a case-by-case basis thing. Like, it's hard to write a rule book for this or a formula. But then healing can happen, exchanges can happen, configurations can be exchanged at subtler levels without that entity ever knowing it took place. Is that your question?
So you've seen the results of that type of healing show up in the sort of personality level of people without their conscious awareness of it.
Yeah, all the time.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So again, from the love one, Ra answers a question and says, you have a misconception. The healer does not heal. We kind of talked about this, but it's a nice quote. The healer does not heal. The crystallized healer, which is another way of saying the integrated, matured, balanced, advanced healer, not just someone who's just kind of starting out and wants to be a healer, but someone who has matured in their self-knowledge and their self-acceptance and their knowledge of the Creator within themselves. The crystallized healer is a channel for intelligent energy, which offers an opportunity to an entity that it might heal itself. In no case is there another description of healing.
In no case is there another description of healing.
In other words, there is no exception to this rule that all healing is self-healing.
Oh, cool.
And that there is no healer that heals. It is only offering an opportunity or catalyst or example or new configuration example that entity can then use to heal itself. In no case is there another description of healing. In other words, there's no exception to this rule.
And from the perspective of the healer, because I remember something in the Law of One, which brings up an obvious but decent example of a healer, which would be Jesus. And one of the examples was that, to simplify it, Jesus wouldn't take credit for the healing. And they said something like, Jesus would say at the end of the healing or the experience of healing, tell no one. So it seems like there is something important about it being a pure service without requiring any sort of credit for it.
Absolutely, yeah. Beautiful. And this is just a path that you walk as you, let's say you have the inclination to become a healer, you have that desire, and so you embark upon this journey, you learn about healing, you learn about yourself in the process. Then quite naturally, as you begin to quote unquote perform healing, which again, you don't, right? Because nobody performs the healing. But for lack of a better word, you start healing, which you don't, but you start doing that thing that looks like you're healing. Then you will meet your ego on the path, regardless. You will meet all your, because every human being grows up with an unworthiness complex, almost all people. Like, we're not good enough. We're not perfect yet. This and that. So no matter what expression or what art we express ourselves in, if I become a top athlete, why are top athletes fueled to fucking destroy their bodies in the process of getting that gold medal? Because they feel they're not good enough. For the most part, is my belief anyway, my observation. There's quite a bit of that. Of course, they have a passion for it. And sometimes, yes, that has definitely been their goal for this incarnation, to demonstrate something. But there is a lot of typically like back context and belief systems in high performers where their high performance is compensating for feeling not good enough. And they can put on a whole show of bravado, and they can develop and get better and more expertise and gain more followers and more financial success and more recognition and more fame. But for the most part, when I observe those people out there, and I've observed it in myself along the way, there are so many sort of deficiency stories that are running underneath the surface that are fuel for the proving oneself to be worthy, right? So similarly to some top athletes that are fueled by their unworthiness, maybe they had a tough childhood, maybe their mom or dad never loved them, they were never good enough, so they had to always perform or outsmart everybody or outperform everybody. So they spend 8 hours a day in the gym, like working towards this goal. And unless they get it, they're not fully happy for the most part. Now, on this journey to get that far, you need to accept your failures, otherwise you can't continue. So sure, they learn, they're spiritually growing for the most part as well. But in a lot of cases, there is some subcontext of lack beliefs and unworthiness. Similarly with the healer, or in spiritual fields, or in self-empowerment fields, or in becoming a public person or teacher of any kind field, or an what's the word? Inspirator? No? No, what's the
influencer?
Influencer, yeah. Like now it's at everyone's doorstep. Now everyone can compensate with Instagram Now that internet and Instagram is here and there's all these means and tools and everyone now knows how to market themselves, everybody can compensate for their like beliefs by becoming an influencer, right? So now we have this whole world of beautiful beings that have, because of a distortion, they become influencers and I don't know what the influence is, a large calculation of the mass and the total sum of all that. But anyway, I'm not trying to bust that. It's cool that it's available, but something to be aware of is, why do you want to be an influencer? So why do you want to be a healer? To all the healers out there, why do you want to be a healer? It's a very important question to ask yourself a lot of times if you are really serious about pursuing the path of being a healer. Why am I doing this? That needs to be a purifying question that cuts through your own ego beliefs over and over and over again. Otherwise, you can never become a crystallized healer, a responsible, balanced, sensitive, wise healer, which ultimately will, in a sense, destroy you as a healer. It will ultimately deplete you as a healer, distort you as a healer. So it's very important to ask the question, why do you want to be a healer? And then to come back to your example of Jesus when he said, tell no one. There's multiple ways to look at that, as there is with anything. Yes, I believe Jesus definitely stood for that principle, and he understood, because he had met himself, he had done the work. He understood that it's not him that's doing the healing. And so that could be one way to convey that. But also that particular quote of, now go home and tell no one, or go forth and tell no one. When he had performed a miraculous healing, when he had offered a new configuration, and they believed so much in Jesus that they accepted that configuration, and now they were suddenly healed, miraculously healed, which can happen very instantaneously, even on a physical level. Miraculous healings do occur all the time in all of our bodies. We just don't know it. It is my conviction that we have many cancerous cells every day, and they get healed every day as long as we stay in alignment. And there's plenty of accounts by now, testimonies and so forth, of people who actually demonstrate spontaneous healing within a matter of seconds. So all these things are definitely possible. So imagine Jesus being the catalyst, the example, the provider, the inspiration for that person to accept that new configuration. And so they have now healed. If they now go home and meet their skeptic parents or their skeptic brothers or their skeptic friends who are in a completely different vibrational paradigm, and this person has just freshly, vulnerably been healed from a condition that has affected their belief system over time, now they're presented with this new configuration, but it hasn't been anchored in yet. Go home and tell no one, because you'll get sick again. You'll get talked out of this new configuration unless you've anchored yourself in that new configuration.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And also it could be interpreted as, yes, go home and tell no one, because, I don't want this to glorify this idea of me as a healer. That would give out a wrong image or wrong understanding. But you get the other portion too?
Yeah, I do.
The other example?
Yeah.
And so often this happens, man. And it's like almost painful to watch. People enter a new environment, or they go to a retreat, say, and they just by being in the retreat and by being surrounded by people of a different state of consciousness than they're used to in their circles, and through their interactions with me and the people there, and with themselves there, because their intention to show up for that retreat is to transform something and to heal something within themselves. They come there, a new configuration is offered, but the issue is it's provided in a different setting. It's a different environment than they're typically in. Now they associate it with that environment, right? Subconsciously. So they get the healing there, or the transformation, or the awakening, or the realization, or the enlightenment moment, or whatever it is. Now they go back to their old environment, but they haven't anchored it in. They're not convinced of it yet. It's still fresh. It still needs to be adjusted to. It still needs to become believed in. Now they go back to an environment that's more skeptical, perhaps. That is more just lower frequency, slow vibration people, which most people are compared to what we're talking about here. It's just slow, it's just dense, it's just Newtonian, it's just like skeptical, it's just realistic, what they think is realistic, which is not, but it's realistic to them. So now this person that's like freshly entered into this new healed state, this transformed state, they can see clearly again for themselves. They're no longer depressed. They're actually a different person. But because they haven't fully convinced themselves of that new state yet, they go back into an environment which only inspires the opposite. And they fall back in that belief. And then it requires their true self-work and their true self-persistence and self-effort to anchor in that new conviction. So it's similar to, go home and tell no one.
Mm-hmm.
Tell no one you came to this retreat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a good thing about the podcast, though, being able to consume information like this from the environment that you're already in, instead of having to go and sort of get this.
Well, it's actually part of the reason. There's been many reasons for it, but it's part of the reason why I stopped doing retreats for the most part. Just like a handful every once, or just a couple every once in a while. Like I've done maybe 2 events in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Like public ones.
Oh yeah.
I do the private ones sometimes, but it's because it's great and it's powerful, but it is taking people out of their normal state and giving them a new configuration, which can be powerful. It can be beautiful, gorgeous, and they're always cool and fun events, and there's always a lot of inspiration and awakening that happens. So I definitely recognize how positive of an effect it has on people. But also it's just a little bit of a messy approach in a way. Or it's just, you can't follow up with 200, 300, 400 people, and you cannot, you can only inspire them, and then they can take that, but they'll have to integrate it at home, which is why, yes, like online courses and podcasts and continued listening to YouTube and audio recordings and stuff, definitely recommended, because you have to integrate it within yourself in your current environment, or you have to change your environment to be more reflective of the people and the setting that inspire this new state in you. But yeah, otherwise it's kind of a pendulum swing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of chuckling at how many people will look at this video and completely dismiss me as an authority on healing because I'm smoking a cigarette. Where actually pure tobacco like this has many healing properties in its intelligence. Most people don't realize that. Anyway. Is there any sort of nuance or subtopic that we could address that a lot of people struggle with? Yep.
I have a comment on integration as well.
Okay.
You want to go? Should I go with that first?
Go with that first, and then can you remember your question? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes complete sense what you say about not being so cold to create so many events with large transformation, because I do feel a lot of people do not fully understand the whole process of transformation. They might have a very transformative experience that is very profound, and on some level they may put too much into that experience and fail to recognize that they have already changed, they have already transformed, and then as they navigate their reality, they have things that come up that they then perceive as proof that they haven't changed. Yeah, it's so unfortunate, because then you begin to perceive what is actually the process of deeper transformation and integration as proof that you're actually not changed and you have regressed. And that was something that was just special to that occurrence.
Yeah.
And then you just, regress and don't fully integrate.
Yeah.
And I did have a question.
And that's kind of where the 3-day process understanding comes in, right?
Exactly.
So day 1, you have a new intention, new configuration, you have an epiphany, a realization, maybe a new intention for your life. You're realize oh, I'm here to just love on people. I'm not actually here to worry about this and that. I'm actually just here to love. Or I'm here to demonstrate through example that anyone can basically accomplish anything they want in life. Or I'm here to help people learn how to meditate, or whatever it is. Or another example of a day one in this 3-day process methodology or understanding would be, oh, I'm healed. Or like, oh, I'm actually worthy. And I feel that worthiness. They may not consciously comprehend it that much, but energetically they feel opened up, they feel worthy, they feel much better, they feel aligned, they feel a passion for being alive, return, and their symptoms decrease in terms of healing. That's day one. Day two, that typically happens when we make a big enough shift from our current paradigm to a new point of view that still needs to crystallize into a belief system. Again, if we use the map of the psychology or the levels of consciousness, now we're going back to a deeper level. We change our point of view that's different from our belief system, different from our paradigm. Day two symbolizes that we're going to get some kind of manifestation or challenge or skeptic on our path, some kind of symbol of skepticism of our new intention, of our new vision, of our new healed state, to sort of test us, ask us, are you ready to really believe in that new point of view? And if the answer is yes, and if the action is yes, and if the energetic vibrational response is yes, it doesn't have to be immediate. You can have doubts that you're working through. But if the end result of that inner work is, yes, I am going to believe that I'm worthy. Yes, I'm going to continue this new epiphany, this new path. And I'm going to break with my old sort of habits and even sometimes circles or friendships that aren't really friendships. Or I'm going to seek out a less skeptical environment, a less dense environment. And so if the answer to those tests or day two challenges are sort of a vibrational convinced yes, again, doesn't mean there's no process involved anymore. For most people, there is some kind of process still involved, some cleaning up, some learning, but that's great. Doesn't matter. As long as the conviction is, yes, I'm going through with my day one intention, with my new realization, my healed state, then the day two challenge has got nothing on you.
Yeah.
It's just recognized to be a test. Like, oh, this is myself, universe, others testing me and asking, do you really believe in yourself? If the answer is yes, then you enter into day three, which is the day of confirmation, celebration, manifestation, and transformation. Then it's been anchored in. Now the new point of view of your consciousness, of your mind, body, spirit complex, then starts to form a new paradigm or belief system, which forms the stage for the next chapter of your life to play itself out on, which can then be represent a state of full healing, for example.
Yeah, beautiful. Understanding that process is so foundational for any transformation, and it perfectly applies to healing here as well. So I had a curiosity about, so if someone who has found themselves going through, they've tried everything, they seem to be going from one modality to the other, one healer to the next, and they seem to find themselves continuously in this cycle of not being healed and experiencing the same problem. What would you say to those people who are experiencing that?
You're most likely resisting the guidance that your higher self is, the phone call of your higher self that shows up in the form of your malcondition or your limitation that you want to transform, or your lack of money, or because this can be many different things, right? Any kind of challenge that shows up in your life that seems to go against what you think out of a state of vanity, for the most part, that you want, but you're not listening. If it's not dissolving after some amount of work and self-reflection and visiting healers and so forth, then it serves a purpose and you're not extracting the lesson from the reason why this manifestation is even there. Therefore, you're literally fighting yourself. And that's never a state to heal in. That's why self-knowledge and self-acceptance is so crucial to becoming an effective self-healer that perpetually self-regenerates all portions of itself, where the refresh rate is high, where there's not a lot of insistence upon this or that. There's a malleability, there's transparency between the personal conscious mind and the higher self's consciousness. There's an ability to listen and to adjust and to let go of attachments and insistences and to trust where this is guiding you and what is it inspiring me to choose next. How is it knocking on my door and asking me to wake up to something that I continue to perpetuate and insist on as if it's my true desire when it's not. It's just a vain desire. It's just a distorted want or a perceived need that's not truly a need. So in those cases, I would say, first of all, fully accept the condition as it is with the knowledge that it is actually a form of guidance. If you can do that, you can develop now a positive relationship with the malcondition, the distortion. And now you can begin to listen and become your self-healer. Because from a higher self point of view, from a soul point of view, what's more important than physical comfort, what's more valued than physical comfort, is to learn the lessons that you wanted to learn. Because that adds to your soul. When you die, that's what you take with you, your growth at a deeper level. You don't take your personality with you, not so much anyway. For some people, their physical personality has become reflective of their soul's personality, so to speak. Therefore, there's not that much of a difference. But for a lot of people, there is a big difference between their soul personality and their distorted earth personality. So in that case, there won't be much resemblance left of their life, of the personality they had as a conscious mind upon death. So let's just say the personality you're familiar with, you won't take with you. Your possessions, obviously, you won't take with you. Your accomplishments you won't take with you. What you take with you is the lessons you've learned, the things you've integrated, the things you've realized and seen about yourself, the ways that you've expanded in consciousness. That's what sticks to the soul. That's what is added to the library of the soul. So from the soul's point of view, which is really what you are more in truth than this physical incarnation, this is just a fingertip of your overall body, your overall beingness. Why do you have this fingertip in this physical reality on planet Earth right now in this third dimensional type of way? Because what's sprouted, what was the seed for that incarnation, what gave birth to you, literally, is an intention. You got to align to that intention if you want to have a smooth and supportive life. Doesn't mean you won't have challenges, because that's part of how you learn, but it means that you are able to self-generate, self-heal, self-regenerate constantly and learn and expand and extract all the nuggets from all the challenges in your life in a much more efficient, quicker way that has to lead to much less stagnation and pain and suffering and confusion and self-hatred and so forth. So it's really crucial that we understand ourselves at a deeper level, incorporate the fact that there is more levels to our intelligence than just our physical mind, start living as a whole unified being by listening to those other levels, becoming subtler in our orientation, using intuition, pausing our mind stream to ask valuable questions, wanting to learn from our life experiences and not just insist upon our preferences. And then we can really appreciate this as a whole living organism that's intelligent and has our best interest in mind. But important to understand, the soul prioritizes learning the lessons and the balances that it wants to, the imbalances that it has at a soul level, because the soul's not complete. It's not the God state yet. It still has a shadow. It still has imbalances. So the soul, through the means of incarnations, desires to balance its understanding of itself. That's why it prioritizes balancing the imbalances and learning the lessons that want to be learned over the comfort of the physical personality creature. So you can fight your physical and mental discomfort all you like, but you're just postponing and you're just resisting the lesson you want to learn. Once you start to realign to that, you'll see everything starts to support you. The pain starts to dissipate. The discomfort and the painful reflections start to diminish. Why? Because you listen now. Your phone call is subtle. It's more immediate. You don't need to first get this reflection, that reflection to wake you up, to shock you into awakening, because you're already paying attention. You're ahead of your own game.
Yep.
Now you can subtly listen instead of ignore the phone call and then, have the IRS on your doorstep because you haven't answered the phone, so to speak. So if you learn to address these imbalances in their subtle early stages, when you're just getting that inclination, that phone call, that impulse, that intuition, and you begin to put things together in this way and understand yourself in a holistic fashion, then you become your own self-healer.
Beautiful. And what you said is crucial. You do need to take a step back from your own mind stream and really just pause to listen to what you're being taught, listen to what you need to hear, and listen to your guidance. I think a lot of people are not responding to their guidance, they're reacting to it, reacting to the emotions, and then that just keeps the cycle in process. They're reacting to, maybe they believe that, okay, I'm not healed, so they have a negative experience, or not a negative experience, a negative emotion, react to that negative emotion, and then that creates more of the problem, as opposed to, okay, I have a negative emotion, this is guidance, let me interpret that as guidance, apply the guidance, learn, and then the way forward will be so much clearer.
Yep. Great.
Yep.
Did you still have a question, Dennis?
Yeah, just I want to share some of the observation that I have in my own experience, and also like with other people, and to address kind of the danger of teachings that only focus on healing. That can like perpetuate this, like always I need to heal something. And also some, then I don't know, should I call students of those teachings that also get into that like downfall.
Great point.
Yeah. So like just if we can address how to recognize it, like those teachings or that energy within yourself, and just break out of that pattern.
Beautiful. I'll be quite frank with this, because there are a lot of self-destructive teachings out there on this topic. And for the most part, they fall in the category of healing modalities or shadow work. And like they typically become promoters of anti-spiritual bypassing, like to a fault. And there is some reality to spiritual bypassing that needs to be understood. However, if it becomes your main focus of a spiritual path, you're off the path.
Nice.
Same with shadow work. If shadow work becomes your priority, it might be necessary for it to be the priority for an individual for a certain amount of time to heal some sort of very specific trauma. That's okay. But if it is the main proponent of a teaching or teacher, then you should see and view, I'm very firm on this, you should use that teacher or teaching only for that period of time where you need to specifically look for that shadow or heal that healing. Don't listen, don't continue to listen or follow that sort of thought flow past the point of having extracted its usefulness. Because if a spiritual path does not aim for enlightenment, does not aim for your realization of the law of one, therefore become a self-healer that naturally self-heals all the time without effort, then plus it's the realization of truth that you want ultimately, no? Then it's not a spiritual path, it's a form of psychology. It's a form of self-help. And that's fine, like if that's the extent to which you want to go. But if you wish to deepen your enlightenment and true empowerment, like actual, like cosmological empowerment, so to speak, you have to, recognize when the teacher is promoting a very limited sort of paradigm or potential for you. And the reason or way that they often do this is because they haven't successfully gone beyond it themselves. They'll become proponents of those who do claim that the path can take you beyond that. And they'll start to make up justifications and reasons and methodologies and examples and try to break things down and deconstruct things in a very psychoanalytic way to try to reduce true spiritual paths and teachings that are about union with the Creator, that are about ascension and enlightenment, by calling it names or by pointing out how it's just all spiritual bypassing and how it's dangerous and how it's not the path to healing or whatever it is. So you got to recognize that a true spiritual path is about realization of your unity with the Creator ultimately. If that's not its end aim, if that's not its overarching guideline, shadow work is part of it. Don't get me wrong, it's part of it. Healing is a portion of it. But if the healing becomes its own focus, now you have developed a bias that you're imperfect. So you'll have endless cycles of healing. Well, my friend, have fun. You're self-perpetuating your distress. You're self-perpetuating your illness by believing in healing as being the most important thing. And again, ultimately, healing is oneness with the Creator. So I'm promoting true healing. That is the healing of a soul, of an entity, is to be rooted in its oneness realization with the Creator, to where there's very little to no distortion between the Creator's essence and your own understanding of yourself. So if things are overly psychoanalytical, and I mean, I analyze a whole lot of things, right? Like I'm intellectually inclined as well in my teachings, but that's just a visible portion of my teachings and what I represent. It's actually a very minor portion, and it's a portion I get tired of real quick. But it is what people enjoy listening to me for a part anyway, is the ability to distill things and to deconstruct things. But it's different, it has a different flavor. If you learn to pay attention, it has a different flavor than when someone has created an artificial ceiling of what's possible for you. And they're typically at the top of that ceiling if they're the teachers, right? Because that's how their own sense of unworthiness, which hasn't been healed because they haven't realized full unity with the Creator. So inevitably, they're just a human being in their makeup, in their psychology. They're just smart and clever, and they've seen a lot of things. And so the ego hides in plain sight and creates this sense and perpetuates this compensatory high performance athlete state in spirituality by being the best at psychoanalyzing everything and reducing true spirituality down to a very boring system of shadow work or healing modalities. And that if anyone ever sort of tries to suggest to go beyond that, they'll shut it down in some fashion. You'll never hear me do that. And I recommend you don't follow for longer than you absolutely need to deal with a portion of yourself any teacher that suggests there's a ceiling for you in any kind of way. Very important.
Nice.
What might that look like? Just when you say that suggests there might be a ceiling for you.
Well, as a way to suggest a ceiling is very popular these days. But again, it's popular by people who have not realized their unity with the Creator sufficiently. The way to create that ceiling subliminally is by calling everything spiritual bypassing, that you cannot psychoanalyze, or that doesn't seem to fit your teaching, so you're no longer the top dog or the expert in your field. Therefore, the only way to maintain your position, not saying all the teachers that are promoting shadow work and self-healing and self-help are doing this to a great extent or deliberately, but there is a lot of that where they create a ceiling in the seeker, in the student, subliminally. Often they don't even know they're doing it because they need to maintain their own game, unbeknownst to themselves. So they need to do a little bit more shadow work. Is by not having people continue to seek deeper and higher, by making them mistrust their seeking tendency, their seeking impulse, by calling the seeking impulse something to be gotten rid of. Never get rid of your seeking impulse. I think we did a whole session on that, no? So I don't have to address that again. Watch that podcast.
What is spiritual bypassing?
Spiritual bypassing is the suggestion, first of all, that you can bypass an issue that you have. Let's say a lack belief,
Gotcha.
right? Typically, that one that's lurking in the shadows, a deficiency story that you're not seeing. For example, I'm not worthy. And therefore, in order to compensate for that worthiness, you're going to try to outperform yourself. You're going to seek for something that would eradicate that, or that would nullify that, or that would prove that you are worthy. And oftentimes, fervent shadow workers will propose that the aim for enlightenment is just another compensatory mechanism.
Wow.
And while it can be utilized in that way, in essence, it's not. And it's the most beautiful impulse that a human being has. It's the core gravitational pull from the Creator to itself. It's sucking all its atoms back into its own source. all the time. All creatures feel a seeking upwards or inwards, ultimately. Sometimes outwards, but that's a temporary journey. Ultimately, it's an inward spool. It's an upward spool, symbolically speaking. There's not really inwards or outwards in God, but in the illusion, it seems to be an inward pull or an upward pull. To try to psychoanalyze and reduce that down by calling that spiritual impulse, associating that with spiritual bypassing, is a very dangerous thing to do. It's the same as cutting somebody off of their life support when they are on life support. But the reason that sort of paradigm self-justifies itself and perpetuates itself and is so appealing is because once one gets into shadow work, one's psychoanalytical abilities increase quite a bit. One becomes very smart. Doesn't mean one's very wise. It just means one is very smart. And one can hide, the ego can hide in more deceptive ways. And if they don't have the understanding, and if healing has been the priority for their life, they're going to obviously promote that that's the most important thing. So, and it's fine. I'm just talking to the people that are wanting to look deeper, that do believe everything is possible, and that are seeking for unity with the Creator. And I'm telling you guys not to ever sell your seeking impulse to any teacher teaching, including myself and my own. Always trust the seeking impulse over any guru or teacher or teaching, always. Because it's your lifeline to the Creator. That's your guru, is your seeking impulse, your impulse for what you really want to seek. Along the way, will you have to acknowledge all portions of yourself? Yes, most likely. I could say most definitely, but there's direct paths that can, to a degree, actually bypass some of that without creating imbalances, but that is rare. And I won't get into that as a whole other topic. But definitely don't throw out the direct path and the seeking impulse because someone proposes that that's a form of spiritual bypassing. Be open to how you are spiritually bypassing, meaning how you are justifying things and applying bumper stickers, spiritual conceptual knowledge to your problems, and therefore avoiding dealing with the feelings and facing the emotions and the lack beliefs. Yes, healing and spirituality is all about including every portion of yourself. Everything is acceptable in the end and needs to be acceptable. If not, enlightenment has not occurred, so to speak. So yes, it's an important component along the way, but it's not the end goal. If it's the end goal, you've created a ceiling. If it's now what's the main thing that's promoted, then you know, okay, great. This teacher might be very helpful for me to deal with this particular trauma. But don't listen to their philosophical approach. Don't listen to their sense of cosmology too much because it's very limited typically. Just recognize the paradigm of the teacher and the teaching. And everyone can do this to clearer or less clear extent, but we can do it to some extent. So great question.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And it feels like a really key and comprehensive point because it then seems like healing is just a sort of symptom of self-realization.
Exactly. Beautiful. Yep. It's the natural result of self-realization. Yeah. So you can have healing and enlightenment. You don't have to choose for one or the other.
Nice.
Enlightenment is the absolute total healing. And again, I'm not saying nobody uses it in the wrong way or that nobody uses the path to enlightenment to kind of bypass their thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and shadows. Absolutely happens all the time. I agree with that. But don't create a modality that then, because perhaps you didn't attain it or because it seemed like the road required too much self-effort and too much conviction, and you just kind of fell prey to more limiting beliefs, and you were too distracted by your addictions, and you were too distracted by your traumas. That's great. That's perfect. Like, that's your journey. But don't try to reduce the one infinite Creator, which is what each entity in essence already is, to a psychoanalytical modality of perpetually trying to look for things to heal and shadows and admit your shadows and this and that. It just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's just at some point, the only way the ego can thrive in that is by becoming better at shadow work than its peers. And it's just, it's a nasty game, isn't it? And there is quite a few communities out there like that. So yeah, be on the lookout and ignore it when you see it. Follow your seeking impulse. Aim high. Aim high. And occasionally, yeah, look low. Dig deep, but aim high. Love yourself. All aspects are acceptable. Yes, look at all the components that you need to look at. Absolutely. But never forget to aim high, because you are the highest. So as a component of the path to enlightenment, shadow work and healing as a modality is perfectly viable and as a beautiful primary distortion of the loved one. As its own goal, it creates a ceiling that becomes artificial, and it's like a pond that can no longer flow into the river to the ocean. And what happens to a pond that's disconnected from the river? It becomes murky, and all kinds of things start to fester in it. And this typically takes time. So if you're so attached to healing and shadow work that this becomes your ceiling and your modality and your focal point and where your ego wants to thrive in, because your ego can never stop seeking for the creator. You can try to suppress it all you like. The ego is going to try to be better than everybody else. Why? Because its very nature is ultimately to seek for the creator, which is the highest of everything. So you can cut off that search for the creator, but then it'll just find sneaky ways to find that feeling in a false way, in different ways. And so now you have a stinky little pond and it doesn't flow. And now you're festering with disease of all kind because you created a ceiling in the name of healing and in the name of integration and unity. And you're just cutting yourself off from the ocean of life. And the sincere spiritual adept doesn't refuse to look at anything that is relevant, that is a pattern that manifests in a distorted way. But sometimes what mainstream thinks is distorted is actually more pure than what mainstream thinks is pure. Things are not always as they seem also. So yeah, it requires each seeker to trust in himself and to find the proper teachings and teachers and to know when something is just a modality or when something actually contains the whole path. Stinky little ponds. The water gets murky. It's got to flow. It's got to flow to something greater always. That's just the force of life. Don't resist it. Yeah, look at your shit along the way. And you will. There's no way around it. Ultimately, you can't spiritually bypass. You can postpone looking at your stuff, but that's the same as with the healing. Why do you get ill? It's to knock on your door louder because you didn't pay attention sooner. So that's the value of having some awareness of shadow work, having some awareness of having to integrate certain aspects of your personality, things that you'd rather not look at, and embracing that and loving that too, knowing that that's acceptable too, and beginning to understand your patterns and your deficiency stories. That's all a beautiful part of it. But to make that the end goal is to completely distort the life force that runs this entity. And then it will try to find its way out inevitably. You can't bypass, also not by becoming an anti-spiritual bypasser. Also, ultimately, that stinky pond is going to collapse in on itself and show you that you have forsaken your deeper search for a falser teaching. So there's no way to ultimately bypass. You can bypass for many lifetimes, you could say, or suggest, or at least for a lifetime. But ultimately, it will be brought to your attention to the point where you can no longer resist it. So ultimately, it's not even possible to spiritually bypass. Doesn't mean I recommend you therefore don't look at stuff. I do recommend, because that just speeds things up and it's part of the process. But this is a divinely guided universe, and you will see everything you need to see and let go of and accept and transform in order to be fully established in the state of consciousness that is commensurate with God.
Beautiful.
Thank you, friends. Any final comments or nuances to the topic of healing? Oh,
Feels pretty complete.
Yeah, it does.
cool. Some people will have the question, why do certain sages develop cancer, for example, like Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj.
They both developed cancer?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
they both died of cancer.
Whoa.
So maybe a short commentary on that, and I'll just say this is my humble viewpoint on this. Take it or leave it. And it's in those types of scenarios, I won't go too specifically into these two cases, but they're examples of people that are typically understood to be quite fully enlightened, and yet they die of cancer. So how does that work? In the case of people like that go really deep and really back to the source, several things can happen. But there's mainly two reasons, in my opinion, in my view, of why someone like that would develop a tangible distortion to that extent. Actually, 3 reasons. The first reason is it's a perfectly viable way to go.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily have to mean it's a distortion. Second way is, someone can have bypassed something and still reach the goal. So there might still be a blockage somewhere on a relative level that's not fully opened or understood. And it's been bypassed to such a degree that it doesn't matter to them anymore. And it really actually doesn't matter. They have become one with God. And it's kind of like leaving a messy room, but going to your destination anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm never going back to that apartment anyway. Yes, it's a mess at this level or that level, or I didn't paint the walls, or I didn't leave it clean for the next tenant. Whatever, apologies, but here I am. I can't do anything about it. I don't want to do anything about it. There's that possibility. To where it actually doesn't matter to them. Like it actually is not an issue. It seems like an issue in our eyes. It seems like a distortion in our eyes, but to them, they have actually transcended it, even though they've not resolved or completely understood certain things. That may, at some level, still require some balancing later on, beyond this incarnation.
Mm-hmm.
Some cases not, case-by-case basis. And the third option, in my view, is when someone goes really deep into source, one does become a mirror to the collective. And the mirror of this, what is this collective? It is like a cancer on this world. So it can be part of their message. Whether or not their conscious mind even understands that intellectually. It's not like they came up with that necessarily consciously, although in some cases they can be aware of it and allow for that to happen as a choice. But by having such an wide open experience and heart, one can take on and reflect, including how do we reflect things? Through our body, through our mind, through our speech, and even through our spirit. We reflect things to the collective when we become a mirror, which simply means that predominantly we know that we are the creator, and we are so rooted in that realization that our vehicles are transformed and they now become the property of the world because they're no longer there for us, really. We can learn directly. We can know ourselves directly. We're no longer as dependent on this personal life that belongs to me. So now the whole life becomes the world's life, in a sense, because love has been perfected. As a result, we reflect many different things, many distortions. Some things pure, some things impure. Not everything we say, in fact, most of the things we say, is a reflection of our personal opinion or point of view, for example. That's one of the hallmarks of mirror consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, our body, physical body, is also offered to the collective. And in a way, we can develop certain reflections also through the physical body of the collective.
So in this case, cancer would symbolize just like the sort of self-deprecation of humanity.
That's just one interpretation, yes. It can also be by just sort of a mechanical effect, almost cause and effect, of reflecting other people's energy all the time that can develop into a cancer. And if that entity no longer cares about that, it wouldn't have to preserve itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that could lead to the death of it. Because again, its bodily life has fulfilled its ultimate purpose already for that entity itself in its own interior state of consciousness. can also it can be very complex, so it's hard to talk about. But one of the reasons could be, let's see, what's another example that people could relate to. One example would be, in order to not deify that person too much and put them on a pedestal of absolute perfection beyond their own means, they could die of the hands of an imperfection.
Mm.
To demonstrate that the true message of enlightenment has nothing to do with outward perfection.
That's cool.
Mm.
That rings
That's
true.
just one example of how dying of cancer could represent lots of things to many people, and it can be like a parting gift to the world.
Wow.
And of course, it's up for interpretation, and people will interpret it according to their own distortions. But it can be like a gift. So it doesn't always have to mean it's a distortion in the entity itself. It can, if something has been bypassed and they just don't give a shit anymore because they've reached the goal. But it can also be a reflective mechanism. That's sort of a offering, a symbolic reflection for the world to interpret as it pleases.
Could also be that Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta were complete with their teachings and their journey here on earth. And like you said, it was just a viable way to go.
Yep.
It was just process done, job complete.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe actually being there after the journey was over. Or maybe they just, I was going to say maybe it manifested because the journey was already over, and then the remainder of the journey was actually cancerous to them being here. So that manifested as a result of that. That's just another speculation.
Mm-hmm. You see, they left us with so many potentials for learning.
Yeah.
Do you know cancer of what?
Ramana Maharshi had a tumor on his elbow, I believe. I don't know if it spread or something. I don't know why that would necessarily kill. But
So random.
yeah. And Nisargadatta was lung and throat cancer, I think.
Okay.
Or throat and head cancer. But he smoked so much. Also.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Nice.
And it also,
It's probably the sense I'm getting from Nisargadatta a bit. It's just like his whole fuck you to the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
his final message to the body.
Yeah. Which one could argue is not completely a balanced approach, but
Yeah.
he reached his goal. So
Yeah.
who can argue with him?
And it's kind of fun. It matches his personality.
It does.
It
right?
really
Yeah.
does.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Thanks for joining us, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Feels done? No?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis and Special K.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Luco.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, everyone.
We should have just said that.
Good luck, Jamie.
Yeah.
Thanks, Fly.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Mirror Talks podcast with Bentinho Massaro. If you love these teachings and you want full access to almost all of Bentinho's recorded material, go to bentinhomassaro.tv. Right now, we're offering a free 7-day trial with unlimited access to everything on bentinhomassaro.tv, including curated playlists, guided meditations, and much more. This is our #1 recommendation for you. As a subscriber, you'll get first access to these podcast episodes 2 weeks before they go public. You'll also get access to exclusive Q&As with Bentinho and other content only available to subscribers of bentinhomassaro.tv. Also, Bentinho recently created a free online global enlightenment retreat. It's 8 long-form sessions that coherently guide you through the foundation of his enlightenment teachings. You can watch the free online global enlightenment retreat at bentinhomassaro.tv or on YouTube. If you're interested in the most current and complete overview of Bentinho's work to date, this is where we recommend you start. Another great resource is Trinfinity Academy, Bentinho's free online school for enlightenment, empowerment, and infinity. Each class is concise and clear and distills one key topic at a time, including homework. We strongly recommend you check out Trinfinity Academy if you want to master the mechanics of Bentinho's teachings. Finally, don't underestimate the value of sharing this episode with the people who came to mind as you were watching or listening. It's a service to them and the collective, and it's also the best thing you can do to support us in getting this message far and wide. We also encourage you to like, subscribe, and leave positive reviews and ratings on your preferred platforms, and follow Bentinho on social media, especially Instagram. Thank you.